Good evening. I'm going to call the Monday, June 11th, 2018 Planning Commission meeting to order. Will everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. First item on the agenda tonight is the approval of tonight's agenda. Do I have any changes or requests to change? I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Move to approve by Commissioner Kirk. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner DeSantis. All those in favor to approve the agenda, say aye.
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 All right, moving on. Planning Commission meeting minutes from Monday, April 23rd, 2018. Do I have any requested edits or changes? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Make a motion to approve the minutes of the meeting on Monday, April 23rd.
I have a motion by Commissioner Freiberg. Do I have a second?
I second that motion.
Second by Commissioner DeSantis. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Minutes are approved. Moving on, we have two public hearings tonight. The first one is variance number 2018-01, location 6810 Shady Oak Road. Request to allow a parking setback of 10 feet. City code requires a 50 feet front yard setback. Will the proponent please step forward? Good evening.
Hello.
If you could you spell your name for the minutes, please?
Sure, I'm Matt Van Sloten. Its last name is V-A-N, capital S-L-O-O-T-E-N.
Great. Could you tell us about your request, please?
Sure. I'm the president of CSM's commercial group, and I appreciate your time tonight to consider this request. We have a little PowerPoint presentation. The staff suggested we do that. Is that up?
It is, there you go.
Okay. So we just wanted to give a bit of an overview here just to kind of fill out the report that you have from staff on this. First of all, the building is 69,000 square feet. It has almost 20,000 feet of office area, so 10,000 or 11,000 feet on the main floor, and then 10,000, another 9,000 that's on the second floor. It all faces the Shady Oak side of the building where we're requesting this variance, this parking. And the entries are there as well. Building was built in 1980. CSM purchased it in 2001. Amerisource Bergen was the tenant in the building at the time CSM purchased it. They moved out in June of last year. They built a building down in Shakopee. And so we knew they were going to move out for a long time. We'd been marketing the building actually since even before January 2016. So for 2.5 years we've been marketing the property. And we've had at least 24 businesses look at it and consider it. And this access to the front entry has been one of the main concerns for the property. It's a floor plan showing how that lays out. So the bottom side is the main floor, and then the top of the page there shows the second floor office, over the main floor office. And you can see the two entries there, which both face Shady Oak. So the primary difficulty we have here is finding a business that can utilize all the office area, which is where you'd have all of your high-paying jobs, and they have to park on the sides and kind of walk around to the front of it. It's just not very appealing. The staff report talks about the 10-foot setback. We just wanted to point out that if you go to the curb, there is a 25-foot right-of-way there, basically. So from the curb on Shady Oak to the drive aisle that we propose, it would be 35 feet. So we believe it has the space to allow the trail, should that come in, or other changes to the roadway. The staff report also referenced a retaining wall along the setback there. I just want to point out, it's a fairly low retaining wall, 2 to 3 feet, and it faces the building, so it actually, the parking lot is lower than the landscaping, which would be along Shady Oak, so it actually helps to screen the drive aisle and the parking area. And with the plan that we proposed, we do have our civil engineer as well, with the chambers that are part of the plan for underground treatment of the water. We actually improved the water treatment over the existing condition. We've done some schematic on the left. There is what the building currently looks like, and our view has been that if we could have this drive aisle and parking, we'd be in an opportunity. This is just kind of one rendering idea. It's obviously not fully fleshed out, but how we could improve the entryway, improve the glass lines on the building, and really make it much more attractive. But it's difficult to make sense of doing something like that without the drive aisle and parking in front of those entryways. In the staff report, you'll hear that evaluated against the statutory criteria, and we just wanted to fill out some comments here. So we didn't restate things that are in the staff report. We're just kind of showing the whole picture. As it relates to the comprehensive plan, we're not requesting a change in zoning. We believe that adding this drive aisle parking, adds more opportunity to have high-paying jobs on site, and that the setback from the curb would allow for widening the road and adding a trail. In terms of harmony with the intent, we think it also provides the opportunity to really improve the aesthetic along Shady Oak. Right now, the building looks fairly old and tired, and it's hard for us to find a tenant or an occupant for the building that would allow us to make the kind of improvement we want to make. If we keep it the way it is, you end up finding kind of lower end, pure warehouse tenants for the space. In terms of whether it's a unique circumstance, this problem was not created by CSM. It was built this way in 1980. And there was a comment in the staff report that it's not for a specific user. That is true. The challenge is to get somebody to find the vision. If we had the user here, we could say, oh, if we did this, you can bring this tenant in and you can be excited about it, but the reality is we need to do it to be able to market it and really show what it can be. We've had many users, as I mentioned earlier, look at it, and they've all turned it down for this being a key reason. In terms of it being a reasonable use, the main point here is that in order to utilize and get full value from the second floor office, that parking is a key factor. And regarding it being in character with the neighborhood, we do believe that this would actually improve the character of the neighborhood. We own the building next door, and from our perspective, having this additional drive aisle and parking and potential improvements that come along with it would just enhance the neighborhood and would certainly not detract in any way from our building next door. So that's really all I have to present, and staff could give the rest of the information. If you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them, and we'll be here if you have questions later.
Any initial questions from the commission?
I had a quick question. I didn't see a parking summary in the application materials. Is this number of parking stalls that you want to add bring you up to code, or does it exceed code? Do you have enough parking now based on the office versus warehouse breakdown? Where are you with parking?
So Mark or John, do you have the answer for that? While he's looking for the exact answer, I will comment that the main factor from our perspective is having parking that's in close proximity to the entryway, and,
right,
and guests being able to drive in and drop people off there and that kind of thing.
Hi, I'm Mark Krombeck with Alliant Engineering.
Could you spell your name for the record, please?
Mark, M-A-R-K, and Kronbeck, K-R-O-N-B-E-C-K. We don't have a breakdown of the what's required by code. All we really have here is that there's 101 existing stalls. We're proposing 24 for a total of 125 stalls. And the building is 60,038 square feet. So I don't know if
the footprint's 60,000. The whole building's 69.
69. So
we're going to be under 2 per thousand for the whole building, even with this added parking.
Right, so you had, I'm sorry, so the total building was 69?
69,000 feet. And
you said you had
125
up front.
stalls with these additional.
So you got about 50,000 square feet of warehouse.
40,000 square feet of warehouse. Wait, no, you're right.
Minus
you're right.
20?
Yeah,
Okay.
50, yeah.
All right, all right. Thanks.
Yes. Commissioner Mehdi.
As far as, trying to lease up this building, is your intent to find one user or two or three? What's sort of the anticipated or range of users that might go in here?
It really could be either. That question's not as hard as the other one. I know the answer to that one. No, our ideal would actually be one. I think that would be the best scenario for the property, but it does subdivide. Probably 3 would be the maximum that we would have. 2 is very possible.
Great. Thank you. We'll go to the city now and
Thank you.
bring up if we have further questions. Julie, will you be speaking on behalf of the city?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair, members of the commission, as stated, this is a request for a variance to the front yard setback. In the I-2 zoning district, both parking and building are required to be at a 50-foot front yard setback, front yard being that yard that is along a public street frontage. So the building currently sits at the 50-foot front yard setback, so to add parking in front of that would necessitate the approval of a variance, which is, and of course, why we're here this evening. As a part of any variance request, there is statutory requirements that must be met in order for a city to grant that variance. As the applicant alluded to, staff has prepared findings related to those statutory requirements in your staff report. So I'll just kind of walk through those one by one and feel free to ask any questions. The first requirement is that the variance should be consistent with the comprehensive plan. The staff is recommending that the variance as requested is not consistent with the comprehensive plan, because if it were to be approved, it would significantly inhibit the city's ability to do any roadway improvement projects along Shady Oak Road. Right now, that right-of-way exists, but if there was a need to widen that right-of-way in order to create any turn lanes or any additional pedestrian connections in that area, because we are getting close to that area that will be dedicated to the LRT Golden Triangle station area and parking. That property is just to the south and the west of this. So if there are need to make improvements to that roadway, there may not be the area to do so if this variance were granted. In addition, the variance needs to be in harmony with the purpose and intent of the ordinance. The ordinance requires that parking lot screening be provided in addition to meeting that setback requirement. With only a 10-foot setback as proposed by the applicant, that does not appear to be sufficient room in order to screen that parking area. In addition, that 10-foot setback that they are proposing is currently a 10-foot easement area. So the landscaping and the small retaining wall that was referred to in the opening remarks would be within an easement area, which makes it very difficult to provide public infrastructure and necessary roadway improvements in that area. Another characteristic or issue that needs to be addressed is unique circumstances. Unique circumstances are defined as circumstances unique to the property and not caused by the current landowner. And the variance request is being requested by the current landowner. The property as it currently sits is in conformance with the city code, meeting that 50-foot setback. There are other options that could be pursued in order to create access within the site. Now, whether that is enhancing the pedestrian connection from the existing parking to the front of the building, relocating some main doors on the back side of the building, there are other options that could be pursued in order to create the type of feel that the applicant is requesting or seeking in the potential lease of this building. Reasonable use of the property is another criteria. It's certainly reasonable that a landowner would expect to provide parking, but a parking setback of 10 feet versus the 50 feet required when it is inconsistent with other development within the area. As you look down that Shady Oak Road corridor, the other properties do meet the required setbacks. And there is quite a significant screening that happens along that corridor in order to provide the aesthetic nature that the city has desired through its zoning ordinances. And again, that speaks to that the essential character of the neighborhood would be altered if the variance were to be approved. So staff is recommending denial of the request based on those findings, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Julie. Any questions for the city from the commissioners?
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Farr.
Julie, could you expound a little bit on your speculation about the expansion of Shady Oak Road? I know we had a Golden Triangle study years ago, and with the light rail coming, you said that it may be something that could happen. Are there any statistics or studies behind that comment of yours?
I can try to address that. The comp plan right now indicates that Shady Oak Road would be planned as a 3-lane with pedestrian facilities. So right now that road is probably 37 foot wide, industrial section. To make it a 3-lane, you'd have to go probably to about 44 with a boulevard, at least a 6-foot boulevard. Hopefully desirable to have 8, and then an 8-foot trail. You're talking at least 5 to 10 feet of additional right-of-way on each side that we'd need. It could be a bigger facility than that, based on what potential land uses could happen out in the Golden Triangle area in the future. I know there's been discussions about more residential out there and other things that could happen in that Golden Triangle. Shady Oak Road's kind of the backbone of that whole street network out there. So we don't want to preclude that expansion opportunities in the future. We're going to have to buy right-of-way or get it dedicated in either case, because I think that's only 70 feet of right-of-way out there today. So we're going to have to buy right-of-way if we want to do any of those improvements.
Okay, so I'm just going to project out 15 years then. We're at that point, and we've granted the variance, and now you have to buy an easement from these people, and their parking lot has to go away. Is that a taking? Do we have to pay them for their loss of revenue of using the building the way it is now, if they have to go back and take the parking lot out?
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, during any negotiations of a taking like that, you would have to compensate them for the loss of what's there, and in this case, you'd have to pay for the parking loss. So you'd have to pay for the land use plus the damages, which would be loss of parking. You'd have to mitigate that or pay that damage as in addition.
Thank you.
Commissioner Farr.
I have a question, if I could ask, please, the city. One thing I know that I don't want to see is I don't want to see another vacant building for a long time. Now, this one's been, you say you've been trying to rent this for 2.5 years. Am I correct? Good effort, the whole thing. And you're telling us that this is a very consistent scenario you're seeing, that this is a problem to it. That's the way I'm understanding what you were sharing with us. Is there any way there's a compromise at all, or is it 10 foot or 50 foot or nothing? Is there any halfway that we can maybe avoid that situation? Because I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, if we say no, could another 2.5 years go by if that building being vacant and maybe affecting a lot more of that neighborhood if there's no compromise as such?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, if you entertain me, I'll take a stab at answering that question.
Thank you.
In some initial meetings with the applicant, we talked about different scenarios, as we always do whenever anyone comes in and is leaning towards a variance. We'd start talking about, are there any code compliant options? Are there other options that require less of a variance than what is being sought? So one of the items that we discussed, if you look on page 2 of your staff report, you can see that the proposed site plan with the 10-foot setback provides angled parking. If instead of providing that angled parking, they did parallel parking along the front of the building, of course it would yield fewer parking stalls, but parallel parking in front of the building would allow for an additional setback beyond that 10 feet. So Again, it would reduce the stalls, so there's kind of a compromise all the way around, but there are other alternatives that would lend themselves to a larger setback. Still not a code compliant one. It would still require a variance, but it would be a different type of site plan with less of an impact.
Can I ask you just one other question? Any idea how many fewer parking spots that would be? Just a ballpark?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I don't know that right off the top of my head. Maybe the applicant can speak to that as an alternative they researched.
Has any research been done on that?
Yes, the alternative of parallel parking was actually drawn. It would yield 12 stalls instead of 24, so half as many stalls. Our view was for getting twice as many stalls, the angle parking was better. The 12 stall plan with parallel parking would be better than our current situation. In addition to having the stalls, you also have the ability just to drive through there and drop people off and pick up and maybe create some visitor parking, that kind of thing.
So are you thinking it's not a viable option on your end? Or it is
I think
viable?
it could be a viable option
It could
for us.
be.
We prefer the plan we submitted,
Okay.
but it could be a viable alternative.
Because my biggest concern is I don't want you to be in this position where you're 5 years from now still looking at that building, because I know that'll affect the others around it. We've seen what can happen when a building stays vacant for a long time. So if there's a compromise, you're starting to get my ear.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, and we would be willing to consider that compromise. And my understanding is instead of a 10-foot setback, the majority of it would be at 24 feet. So is that correct? So it's a pretty dramatic difference from that standpoint in terms of what the variance would be.
Okay. Thank you.
Julie, would that particular option, would that inhibit the city from expanding Shady Oak as well?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, we haven't seen a drawing that proposes that. Staff would want the opportunity to take a chance to review that to make sure we're all measuring from the same starting point and that we're all having an apples to apples comparison conversation.
The questions or thoughts from the commissioners?
Public hearing?
Yeah.
I have a few comments that I'd like to share. As I'm looking at this, I agree. I think it's important for us to do what we can to help keep these buildings leased, and we don't want to create this functional obsolescence that seems to be here. But at the same time, as I'm looking down the street, every other property is set back as far as this building is, and this would be different than all the other properties. And I think we just have to keep in mind that this would set a precedent for what, if all these other properties on the street decide to do this, is that okay? I think we need to just, go through that exercise, both sides of the street. Would that be work for both widening the street and just, how this street's developed? Also, I feel that if we are to consider adding these stalls, I would want to know what the current parking requirement is and the minimum and maximum, if any, that are based off of the revised site plan. I'm worried we're potentially triggering another variance for all we know with the number of stalls that are being added, so I think that would be important to know. And one other thought I would have is it seems like there's an option to move the entry of the building over to either side or front corner of the building where there is a larger parking field. And with that, and if Matt has anything to explain as to why that would or wouldn't be a good option, I'd be happy to hear, but that seems like that's another alternative that would help to create that front entryway. Overall, I think that I do like the rendering and the idea that this building could be enhanced and will have a nicer landscaping enhanced entryway, but I think a few of those issues I noted have me concerned.
Julie, could you speak to the parking requirements, please?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, parking requirements are calculated based on the use that's in the building. So until we know what use is occupying the building, we're unable to calculate what the parking requirements are. So for instance, you know, office parks at, I believe it's 5 per 1,000 square feet of floor area. Manufacturing parks at, I believe it's 3 per 1,000. Warehousing has its own requirement. So depending on whether there's a single user and there are different types of uses that occur within the building, or potentially 3 different users, as the applicant spoke to. What I can tell you is that there were not any parking waivers that were given for this site when it was constructed, so presumably it met the requirement that was typically looked at in the early 80s, which was basically developing the buildings and parking lots to meet a third, a third, a third. So if a third of the building was used for office, a third for manufacturing, and a third for warehouse, parking was calculated typically based on that generic formula, if you will. So presumably the site does meet parking requirement needs based on that type of use.
Julie, do you know offhand what level of changes can be made before you trigger an entire site plan review? I know some cities, after you add more than 10 stalls, it triggers a whole, you know, even if the site was grandfathered in zoning wise, because you're making such a large change, it would have to kind of start over. Do you know offhand what triggers a site plan review?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, a site plan review, it can be triggered by any number of things. A facade improvement would trigger a site plan review. So for instance, that rendering that was shown in the PowerPoint is not something that staff has seen before, but reskinning a building would require site plan review. That would typically, so long as it is code compliant, be a minor amendment, so it could go straight to the to the city council without review by the planning commission in order to expedite that review process. Also, changes to the parking lot, sometimes reduction of stalls or reconfiguration of existing parking areas, while still retaining code compliant parking, would not, or would trigger a site plan review, but again, it could go straight to the city council. So at this point, I would anticipate that any changes to the parking area, or if they were to reconfigure the entrance as was identified as an alternative, any one of those could render a site plan review process. It may be an expedited process, allowing it to go straight to city council, but depending on those improvements, it might trigger a full review requiring planning commission.
Mr. Van Sloten, would you like to speak to exploring the options within the footprint of, did you explore moving the entrance on the side or in the back, or?
Yes, is it possible for me to just go back to that building floor plan again that I had in the PowerPoint, or?
Sure.
So when you look at this floor plan, you can see the office area along the front of the building there in the second floor above. It doesn't reach all the way to the west end of the building, or what would be the northwest end of the building. So there's a bay there where the warehouse comes all the way through to the front. So on that end of the building, it really wouldn't work to put the entrance, from the side without adding even more office. The 20,000 feet of office, almost 30% of the building, is actually fairly high for this type of property already. And as a rough rule of thumb, I think there was some reference to 20,000 feet at 5 per 1,000. That would be 100 stalls right there. And if you had another one for 1,000 feet of warehouse, you're at 150. Even with our added parking, we get to 125. So we're still short of that. And I think, regarding the precedent concern, I'm not an expert in this, but you look down Shady Oak, most of the buildings actually are set back further, actually further than the 50 feet, and then there is parking in front of the buildings. So the parking lots are what are at the 50-foot setback. And the challenge we have here is that this building was built at that 50 feet. I don't know exactly what the ordinances were at that point in time, but the only way we can get parking in front of it is to encroach on that setback. And one other comment on the entry locations. The existing entries that are there's 2 of them, and they actually function pretty well. They have nice they're open to second floor, and then there's stairways that come up, and they're dated and would need to be updated, but they're actually pretty good physical features to work with in their existing locations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is a public hearing. If anyone would like to come forward and speak for or against this project, you can do so now. Seeing none. Comments or further discussion from the commissioners?
I'll weigh in. From my perspective, when I read the information and looked at the property, the one thing that struck me is there's a bunch of speculation going on. There's speculation on we could make this property easier to lease and fill it up sooner if we added this parking. And on the other side, there's speculation that we actually have a plan that says that potentially in the future we're going to expand this road and need the space. And I'm a little bit leery of variances on speculation. That's my role. But since there's a little speculation on both sides, I had to then look beyond that from my own perspective. One thing that struck me is this is near a light rail station. So we've got the whole transit-oriented development fitting in there, which to me lends a little bit more strength to the city's position of something changing. We don't know what transit-oriented development's going to do for Eden Prairie, but we know it's going to do something. And then, Mark's comment about this compromise, that would be of interest. I guess to conclude where I was leaning on this, I was leaning against approving this variance. But if we could find some compromise, that would open my eyes a little bit more. So I guess I wasn't as eloquent as I would like to be, but I think you got my point.
Thoughts from other commissioners?
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Farr.
I too am torn on this. If there's any street in Eden Prairie that I would consider a front yard setback variance to, this would be it. It's kind of buried in an industrial park, and short of the comments the staff made about it being a key road in the future for our light rail, it seems like this would kind of be the place. And I'm all about maintaining life expectancy of our aging building stock, and that would extend the building life as well. So that's kind of leaning to the positive. On the other hand, I was happy to see the client's rendering of the facade improvements and kind of the repositioning of this aged product. And it became apparent to me that with the money that they would spend on this repositioning, that to Commissioner Meddy's point, relocating those entrances to the side would be just a fundamental game changer. There's nothing to say that those entrances have to stay there, given the amount of investment that I think they're prepared to make already with the facade improvements and the parking lot and the drainage, et cetera, et cetera. This 38-year-old building deserves a major repositioning. And I think a solution like that would certainly afford parking to be close to the entrance while maintaining what level of flexibility that the staff feels we need for that road right-of-way. I also know that there's really smart people buying and selling these industrial buildings, and this is such an obvious shortcoming of the facility by inspection by anybody in real estate that they would have certainly developed an exit strategy when they purchased the building in 2001. So I was a little disappointed not to read in the staff report that the owner had contacted staff in 2001 saying, hey, what can we do about this building sometime in the future if we ever have the tenant leave, because it's frankly an albatross. So without all of a sudden any plans for this that would have been in any way compliant, it's a little surprising that now that the tenant's gone, now we have to figure out a variance for it. So I think there's a solution at hand also. I don't think it's on the table today, but I think they're willing to put forth a life-extending effort into this aging product, and I applaud that for them. I think they've come up with a very creative landscape plan and stormwater management and exterior design thought process. And if it's causing staff concern about the right-of-way flexibility, I'm sensitive to that, and we have to make sure that we maintain flexibility. So I think we're close, but we're not there.
Any other thoughts?
Well, I just want to, if I could just interject, is that I made my position, I think, pretty well stated as far as that compromise is going to get my ear on it, and I'm going to strongly encourage compromise on this from both sides. Because, as Commissioner Kirk said, he was right, there's speculation on both ends. You don't know what the tenant would be, but you have a bad situation now. And, and the city's looking at speculating that they may go to 3 lanes. I'm hoping for a compromise for you.
Julie, by way of process, I think informally, I think that we're not in favor of this particular variance. In way of process, what would you recommend as far as if they were going to go back to and bring some other options forward?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I think there are several options in front of you. As we've already stated, staff is recommending denial of the variance. That is an option. There were a lot of things talked about as part of a compromise. Now, whether that's stormwater management improvement, that's a facade remodel, none of those have been looked at in detail because that hasn't been a part of the proposal. The proposal before you this evening that was analyzed was simply the variance. So, as you know, anytime the city receives an application in, we have a statutory time frame by which the city needs to grant a decision. I don't know off the top of my head what our deadline is on this particular one. I could look through my notes here in a minute and see it's probably sometime in July or early August. So you could direct the applicant to go back and come back with further information. Whether or not we'd be able to get through that process in in the required time frame, that I don't know, because I don't know what that plan is going to look like, what all of those considerations are going to be. They could certainly always come back with a site plan review process if the alternative was to close out this request and just direct them to pursue other options and letting them know kind of the inclination of the Planning Commission, and then they could come in with a new application for that. So you do have options in front of you.
So a denial on this particular application doesn't preclude them bringing forward other options?
Correct.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Farr.
I don't know if it would be possible either with staff tonight or sometime in the future to, if we were to do this, give the applicant some guidance as to the right-of-way width that would be dear to us to change the finding of staff from denial to acceptance. If that was just one of your findings, sticking points, but I think that we talked about parallel parking, and I'm not sure that did it. If there's a dimensional discussion that can happen so that they don't waste their time coming back and it's still just not good enough. You know what I mean? Good point.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that's why I think it would be important for staff to be able to have the opportunity to sit down with the applicant, react to alternatives that are in front of them, take a harder look at what gets presented back to staff, and having the time to be able to dedicate to that process to make sure that everybody is on the same page and not going through process for the sake of going through process would be helpful.
Mr. Van Sloten, a comment?
Comments. If you are inclined to support a potential compromise solution, we're certainly willing to table this tonight and provide whatever additional extensions might be necessary, and to meet with staff. And I think we would come back with a parallel parking plan and determine what the maximum setback could be and the minimum variance would be. And I will comment. Our intention and if we do this, we can get more detail when we come back. But our intention is to build the parking. This isn't a speculative approval from that standpoint. It is to make to the investment in the parking. We were intending to hold off on investments in the actual exterior of the building pending, you know, who the tenants would be and allow the tenant to have some input on what that design would be. But with the idea that if we had the parking, then we'd be able to market our planned improvements to the property and then have an actual business cooperate in fulfilling that vision.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Julie, so just, again, sorry, a process question. If it was tabled, that doesn't, the clock's still running on the city?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that's correct.
Okay.
And Julie, if I could ask a question, if it's denied, is there a financial implication for reapplying? A significant financial implication for reapplying for the?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, a new application fee would be required, and I apologize, I don't remember the application fee off the top of my head. I want to say in the neighborhood of $300 or $400.
Not significant.
Yeah. That's probably the way to go.
Okay.
Simple denial.
Okay. All right, I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask you what the motion, how it would be stated?
Well, first we're in the public hearing still.
To close the public hearing?
Correct. Yeah.
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
All right, Commissioner Freiberg makes a motion to close the public hearing. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Farr. I think what I'm gathering is we're leaning towards an outright denial, and then give the city more time to go back and work through this with the applicant. It's kind of the consensus I took.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
To come back with the compromise at the time.
Yep. Some other options are a compromise.
Okay.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, make a motion to recommend.
Hold on a
Gotta
sec,
vote.
we need to vote on
We gotta
closing the
vote on
public
that.
hearing.
Thought we did.
All those in
He made a
favor?
motion, but
All those in favor of closing the public hearing, say aye.
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 All right, public hearing is closed.
thank you.
I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, move to recommend denial of variance 2018-01 based on staff recommendation and information contained in the staff report dated June 7, 2018, and plan stamp dated June 1, 2018.
I have a motion to deny from Commissioner Farr. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Freiberg. All those in favor to deny? Say aye.
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 Opposed? All right. We hope to see you back soon. We appreciate the investment in the land, so we hope you can come back with something that works.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Next on tonight's agenda is location 970 Prairie Center Drive, request for planned unit development concept review on 13.6 acres. Planned unit development district review with waivers on 13.6 acres. Site plan review on 13.6 acres. Preliminary plat of one lot into two lots on 13.6 acres. Will the applicant please come forward? Good evening.
Good evening.
Could you state your name and spell for the record, please?
Yep, Jeremy Foss. It's Jerremy Foss. And I'm with ISG. I'm the civil engineer for the project. So thank you for hearing about our project tonight. I'm representing Epic LLC, which is going to be the owner of the proposed culverts that we're going to talk about. Let's see, got it up here. So we'll just go through a general synopsis of the project and then open it up for questions, since I know you have the staff report in hand. So Dean Snyder is going to be the general contractor for this job, and they're the acting developer for Epic LLC to redevelop this site. This site is located at the Prairie View Retail Center in the northeast corner of Prairie Center Drive and Plaza, and so right now it's an existing parking lot that will be redeveloped into about a 4,700 square foot Culver's restaurant. Part of the reason why we're coming forward with the Culver's restaurant in this current location is that the existing location where Culver's is located is at the Southwest Transit Center, which is part of the coming light rail improvements. There will be eminent domain in that area. So the city has worked with helping the owner find a location, and this site seemed to be a pretty good site for that relocation. Let's go to the next slide. So the site will be reconstructing the existing parking lot. That parking lot right now is somewhat underutilized, and it's in that corner, as stated before, that doesn't seem to be used as much. So it seemed to be a good location for a building to enhance the area and reuse this area that's not being utilized now. As part of those improvements, there'll be some new drive aisles, stormwater facility, utilities, some landscaping, obviously meeting all of the city code requirements and the watershed district requirements. So this is the site plan. Existing land use, obviously, is a parking lot. There's no existing structures on that parking lot. It's all asphalt. There's no steep slopes within the property limits. The property is going to be subdivided into a lot specific to the Culver's piece. It's about 0.99 acres, 1 acre, of a larger retail site that's about 13 acres, just over 13 acres. As you can see in the site plan, there will be sidewalks on the north side, the east side, and a little bit of the south side of the building, with an extension all the way over to the public sidewalk along Plaza Drive, which will provide some connectivity to the regional trail system over by Purgatory Creek. And then we're also proposing a stamped asphalt connection to the Culver's store up to the grocery store. So that'll be a shared pedestrian area within the existing drive aisle. And that was just one way to kind of provide a very specific location for pedestrians to traverse within the retail center without having to redo the entire parking lot, since that's not something that is being proposed at this point. I should point out, too, that the overall retail center is owned by Prairie View Retail LLC, which is basically a subsidiary of United Properties. So they will continue to own the lot of this subdivision, but Jonathan Mathias will own the actual building of Culver's. The new parking lot improvements will provide 59 spaces specific to Culver's. So there is a little bit so they are utilizing some of the existing parking lot to provide those stalls, but those are all within the Culver's lot. And this is the landscape plan designed to meet the city requirements. It includes new trees as well as shrubs, a mixture of the two. There will be an outdoor seating area off the northeast corner of the building, which will have like a 3-foot area between the curbing and the patio space for some landscaping. So there'll be a variety of different plantings within there, with a ornamental fence and then some planters at the corners to kind of define that space. And then we move on to the architecture. This is more of a description of what the next ones look like, but it's a manufactured stone veneer, manufactured brick veneer, metal cornice trim. The restaurant features some glass at the storefront and in the dining area, and then decorative fencing around the outdoor patio area, like I mentioned, and then complementary colors, including the blue parabet caps, clear anodized aluminum doors and windows, and blue canopies will also be incorporated in design, which is typical of a Culver's restaurant. And then the trash enclosure is also attached to the building, is actually part of the building on the northwest side to provide screening for the dumpster. And you'll see that in the site plan. You can see to the west of where the handicap stalls, there's a space there for basically a little driveway. So it almost acts like almost like a garage door in a way. And so these are renderings that you probably have seen as part of the report, but this is looking from the northeast corner of the building at the outdoor seating area. It's a rough depiction of what it will look like with the planters in the corners, the ornamental fence. And then this is from the southeast corner, looking at the drive-through, and then the south entrance to the building. And so from this perspective, this is where you'd have pedestrians coming from Plaza Drive. And this is from the northwest corner of the building, and that shows the trash enclosure location for easy access, as well as providing that screening. And then obviously the southwest corner to finish it up. So that's a quick general overview, so if you have any questions, we're here to answer whatever you may have.
Great. Thank you. Any initial questions for Mr. Foss?
Yes.
Commissioner DeSanctis.
There's an ill-defined two-way road in that area south of the Lunds Byerly store parking area. And I'm wondering, as this development is being considered, and perhaps this question needs to be directed to the city engineer, will there be a coordination between Lunds Byerly's, Culver's, and the city to create a very clearly marked two-way passage through the center of that area?
Would the city like to speak to that, or?
I would have to look at the aerial to figure out where you're talking about. Is that near the entrance of the actual grocery store?
It's several hundred yards south of the
Oh, you're saying the drive aisle that's just right north of the Culvers.
Right, it would be right,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
directly north of
Okay.
your proposed building.
Yeah, so we have on the site plan, we do have some arrows that we're going to stripe, at least for the portion of the Culvers piece, but I mean, if that's further east, that's not necessarily in our area of work, but I mean.
Well, that's really my
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
Is how will that be coordinated and synchronized with the city and with your development?
That's something that I think we can go back to United Properties and see if they want to include some additional striping for that.
Julie?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, if we could have the document camera, and I'll try and center this a little bit better. So I believe what Commissioner DeSanctis is referring to is this drive aisle that essentially, I shouldn't say essentially, it exists today in the parking area, and it serves as a cut-through, if you will, in that parking lot to get over to Baker Square or Starbucks or some of those other users. That is on private property. That is United Properties property. So the city would, through the site plan review process, be able to comment on any recommendations that we may have in order to improve circulation, but it would be the responsibility of the property owner to make those improvements because it is not a city street. It's on the parking lot. If I'm looking at the correct area.
Right.
Yes.
I'm sorry, so far. I thought your question, and stop me if I'm wrong, was on the SWIP plan, you're cutting that off. That's the issue, is you're pinching that down. It's a two-way aisle right now, but during construction, you're putting your erosion control out there on the eastbound lane, so it's turning a two-way aisle into a one-way aisle during construction. And I thought that's where you were leading with your question. So what are you going to do about people? Because everybody who enters the center comes in off of Prairie Center Drive there, has to make that U-turn and proceed east to find their parking space.
So we'll probably have to do some type of traffic control plan to help with that and figure out during the construction how to stage that properly.
Right.
Because there will be a point where we will have to close it down to make those, at least half of it, to make the improvements that we're showing. So we'll have to basically reroute, or maybe it's making it one way temporarily for those coming into the site, so that if they want to go westbound, they're going to have to use a different route. Maybe one of the existing drive aisles that goes north-south.
Any other questions before we go to the city's report?
I have one more for the applicant. I'm sorry. She was
Commissioner Mint.
I have just a quick question. I'm looking at the site plan. Directly east of the building, there seems to be what looks like a blank area. I can't tell if that's an additional patio space or what that is exactly.
Right now, that's proposed as green space with some landscaping in there. So I think there'll be sod and then landscaping up against, like basically foundation plantings up against the building.
Thank you.
Commissioner Farr?
You showed us a partial site landscaping plan on your presentation, zooming in on that 1 acre parcel. And then in a different package of the application, I noticed a more global landscaping plan as you're trying to make some improvements to some of our the parking area islands and things like that. So I'm assuming that global landscape plan of the entire parcel is part of your landscape effort besides just the 1 acre. Is that correct?
It is, but it is also somewhat separate from the Culvers development, since that's on the United Properties parcel. That's not part of this project, but as part of doing this work, they're committing to the city that they're going to do this work over I think they agreed on a 2-year period to improve all of the islands elsewhere within the center and add in landscaping.
Okay, so, yeah, it sounds like staff will talk about that contingent approval or whatever that turns out to be. So, my associated question with that is, because you're thinking holistically on the landscaping, is there any way we can think holistically on the lighting? Seems like you're turning your parking lot lighting into LED, but they're not. That's really awkward.
So I can't speak for United Properties and what they're doing on the rest, but I do know that they are working on upgrades as part of facade upgrades, and I think lighting is included in that as well. But that they probably will be coming to the city as a separate petition for that work.
Thank you. Commissioner DeSantis.
Question, is there any provision for renewable energy add-ons now or later?
So I obviously have to look at the owner on that question. He's answering yes. There's a possibility for some of that.
Thank you. We'll go to the city's report now. Thanks, Mr. Foss. Julie, will you be speaking?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair, members of the commission, as stated, you have an application before you this evening for a PUD concept review, PUD district review with waivers, site plan review, and preliminary plat of 2 lots into 3 lots. So, as stated, the proposal this evening comes as a result of the need for the existing culverts to relocate due to the Southwest LRT project. So they have had conversations with staff for quite some time to try and find a property in town that suited their needs. Their desire, of course, was to stay in Eden Prairie and continue to serve the customer base that they have. So this location seems to provide a solution to that issue. So the site plan that you have before you this evening, as stated, is in the corner of the parking lot of the Prairie View Mall, Lunds and Byerly's area. So the analysis that you have primarily focuses on the Culver's lot because that is the new development. To a lesser degree, we'll get into the conversation that Commissioner Farr initiated about improvements to the remainder of the shopping area. But at first, I'm just going to focus my comments on review of the Culver's proposal. So the site plan for Culver's does meet and exceed the requirements for building materials and building architecture. That was a process the city recently went through with the design guidelines update and associated code improvements. So it is compliant with regard to that, as well as landscaping requirements on the Culver's lot. There was a traffic study that was done as a part of this project as well, and Mr. Rue may be able to speak to that in more detail if you have detailed questions, but in essence, in a snapshot, that traffic study came back with satisfactory results. It also does propose the addition of a short left turn lane on Plaza Drive, and the applicant has indicated that they would be constructing that as a part of this project prior to certificate of occupancy for the Culvers. In addition, there was, with the design guidelines, there was discussion about parking lot improvements. So here's where we get into the conversation about the broader Prairie View retail centers. That center is, of course, non-conforming with the recently adopted parking lot standards of landscaping islands every 20 parking stalls, islands of a minimum size requirement. So through the review of the Culver's proposal, staff has worked with the applicant to determine how those improvements could be made on the larger Prairie View parcel. Many islands exist already. Some of them are just striped. Some of them have rock in them, so they're non-compliant from that perspective. The applicant has put together a plan that would bring the site into compliance, either installing new islands where they're necessary or removing the striping or the rock and putting landscaping in there. However, they are requesting that they be able to defer those improvements for 2 years That is a different model than what we've seen with the Jerry's Foods or the Shields improvement, but due to the fact that this is a project that has been born out of a relocation due to a public improvement project, staff feels that that is something that at a staff level we can support as a recommendation, and that language would be included in the development agreement to tie those improvements to a specific date in time in which they would need to be met, or potentially if other improvements were proposed, that these improvements to the parking lot would be prioritized over other improvements to the site in order to ensure we get closer to compliance with those design standards. In addition, there are several waivers that are being requested. One of the waivers that's being requested is for parking, because of course there is parking provided on site. With the removal of that parking in order to construct the culvers, there will be obviously less parking on site. So when you take a look at the site overall, once culvers would be constructed, the site would essentially park at 4.3 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet of floor area. When taking a look at other retail centers in town, Preserve, forgive me, I forget the name of the one that Kowalski's is located in, but that particular shopping center, Eden Prairie Mall, the city has granted waivers ranging from anywhere from 4 to 4.5 stalls per 1,000 square feet. So at 4.3, they're right in the ballpark. They're on target for what they could need. In addition, with this application, there was a parking analysis that was done. Of course, they wanted to determine if we build a culvers here, would we still have enough parking left based on current needs and demands, as well as once the culvers was operational. And that parking study also did indicate that parking would be consistent with the overall business needs. So staff is recommending approval of that parking waiver to 4.3 per 1,000. The other two waivers relate also to the parking lot. One is for parking setbacks on the east, south, and north sides of the Culvers lot. By and large, these are existing conditions because that north lot is the shared parking line, and the east and south are existing conditions from the property line. The third variance is one of the parking islands that is being proposed, an existing parking island, falls short of the minimum 160 square feet in size. So all of the new islands that are being created are all code compliant, and overall the parking islands exceed the amount of space needed, but we do have one that falls just a tad bit short on its square footage. So staff is recommending approval of that waiver as well. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. I hope that wasn't too long-winded, but I'm happy to answer anything that you might have.
Great, thank you. Questions for the city?
I have a question for the applicant, simple one.
Sure, Commissioner Kirk.
How does the size of this culvers compare to the existing culvers by Southwest Station? Same size? Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Farr.
question of staff. On the preliminary plat, there's a perimeter D&U easement around the perimeter of this small lot. The tall retaining walls on the west and the south of this lot are on the right-of-way. They're not on the applicant's property. Whoever owns those retaining walls, is there enough of an easement there to grant maintenance and access for repairs or replacement of that wall once this facility is constructed?
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, that wall was built by MnDOT when they built the interchange. So I would presume that they obtained that easement off that both sides of that shopping center property. So it's a fill wall, so most of the structure is on the roadside, but I would presume that they've got enough room to do that. But we didn't obtain that easement, so it looks like it's fairly close to the property line. In this plat, or for the Culvers lot here, they're going to have that 5-foot easement as well. So if that wall needs to be replaced in the future, they'd have to deal with that at the time. If there's not enough, they'd have to deal with acquiring more easement if necessary.
Okay, do those agencies look at these plans?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, staff does send the plans out to the impacted jurisdictions. So for instance, watershed district, MnDOT, the county, whoever is the appropriate agency, depending on the parcel. So yes, they would see a copy.
Okay, just want to make sure they have a chance to comment on that. Oh, thank you. Other questions, comments? I'll go to the public hearing. This is a public hearing. If anyone would like to come forward and speak for or against this project, you may do so now. Seeing none? Yes, Commissioner Meti.
I have a few comments. Overall, I think, this looks like a nice development, a huge improvement as to what's there now. It's a very underutilized parking lot. And I have no concerns on the parking waiver. There's nobody parks there now, so I don't think it's going to affect any existing users, and there seems to be plenty for the new use coming in. I do have a few concerns with the architecture of the building. I think looking at it, it looks like this is your typical new Culvers that are coming in, but I think here in Eden Prairie we have a little bit of an expectation that, our buildings will be a little bit more than your average coming in. So my main concern, I have two main concerns with this. One would be the windows. There's very, very few windows, and the ones that are there are pretty small in terms of where they start from the ground and where they finish at top. I always think of developments as, long term, if this might be a different use, can somebody else besides the Culvers come in here and operate? Let's just take any normal restaurant that might be. I really think this is lacking in the number of windows. I could get into, I guess, a little bit more specific comments, but I'll save that. Other than I think that in the dining area and really the northwestern and the main entry area, I think could definitely have room for more glass, as well as to the west of the entry where there's currently back of house. Maybe we have some sort of is it spandrel glass, the glass that you can't really see through, so that at least maybe down the road it could be, if there's a different use there that you want to open that up, it could be clear. Otherwise, at least it looks a little bit better. So that was one big and really main concern with the overall architecture. The second being one thing that this really stems from hearing a little bit from the city of Wayzata. Actually, they have in their design standards this concept of franchise architecture, and they want to avoid what they call franchise architecture. I think it's an interesting concept, and it basically says if there wasn't the signage on here, would you know what this is? Is the McDonald's without the big M still look like a McDonald's? And you want to try to avoid that. I kind of see my main comment to that effect is the blue trim along the parapet. I get that it's with the branding, but not exactly. Other than it being a Culver's and for branding purposes doesn't entirely make sense. I'm not a huge fan of that. I would prefer that just be normal. So that's a specific comment on the architecture. One other, I think it's a relatively minor concern because I guess it's more of a question that I'd like to understand is sitting from the intersection up here, whether you're getting off the highway and taking a left, or taking a right from Plaza Drive, are you looking over basically the roof of this building with all the HVAC equipment on top? Is there any screening that we would want to see? I know there's a lot of trees there, so maybe it's not something where we'd be looking at that roof, but I don't know if there's a way to tell with Google Maps or doing some sort of rendering to be able to show what that would look like. The crosswalk to Lunds, honestly, I'm not sure that I think that that's all that necessary. I mean, I guess it's good to have, but I wouldn't actually want to encourage pedestrians to go that route. I think they could go south here. This sidewalk connects down on Plaza Drive, and then taking that up to the trail seems like a better route. So that's neither here nor there. Your comment on the LED lighting, I think that, you know, it should be good to have here. I don't know if we can make Lunds do that, but I think if we have to suffer for a little while until they do get their program in place and updated, that's fine. The LED's a lot better. Overall, I like the amount of green space. I'm not at all concerned with the waiver on one of the parking lot islands. And I'm not concerned with the idea of United Properties having 2 years to complete their upgrades. So that's my list.
Would the applicant like to speak to any of those concerns? Good evening.
I'm Chuck Jansen, Janson, the DSC Design Group architect for the building portion of the project. As far as future use, if there is another tenant that comes in, the building is a wood frame building, so it's very easily to install larger windows or something like that for a future franchisee that may have a different architecture to their building. As far as addressing the Culver standards, we just try to follow those as closely as we can. We did enhance the building from the standards by increasing the amount of brick and stone on the building. And as far as the colors, those are their standard colors, and we tend to try to stay as close as we can to the franchisor's desires as well.
Are you familiar with, up on the street, are you overlooking the top of the building, or is it above the sight line?
Well, I would think the building's 23 feet high, and the roof is at about 13 feet. So there's about a 10-foot parapet on the building to screen mechanical. And I think we did a rendering that indicated how the equipment would be screened by the building. I don't know. I guess you're looking through a grove of evergreens, so I don't know what you expect to see, since it's a year-round screening of the facility.
Yeah, I think it was just more the question, is that what you see, which I think would be fine. And I'm sorry if I missed a plan showing what the screening would be. I didn't catch everything, so.
Thank you. Julie, would you like to speak?
Mr. Chair, in addition to the screening requirement, the development agreement, the city standard development agreement includes language about mechanical equipment screening. So that will be reviewed at the time of building permit. And as much as we definitely try to make the mark and make sure that everything is screened, the development agreement will include standard language that says upon construction, if there are still mechanical equipment that are visible, that the city has the opportunity to continue working with the developer to make sure that installation of screening materials happens in order to screen those mechanicals. So I just wanted to follow up on that question as well.
Other questions from the commission?
Could I interject something if I could, Mr. Chairman? First off, I want to just make a comment that I recognize that you could have gone anywhere. There's nothing that said you had to stay in Eden Prairie, and we need to recognize that. You've been a great, great community neighbor. I mean, it's been a great relationship with the people of Eden Prairie. And I want to commend you as far as wanting to stay in Eden Prairie. And I think when I'm looking at this project, I'm looking at where you're putting it, and that's just been just a vacant area there as far as just a lot of blacktop for a long time. I think it's going to be a good site. I think you got a good plan. And again, I want to thank you as far as deciding to build in Eden Prairie when you didn't have to. Thank you.
Mr. Farr?
I share those comments. I certainly am very happy that Culver's is staying within our city, and I think you've put forth a great application here, and I really appreciate it. I think there's a good location for you as well. A couple technical things you'll want to come back up to the podium later and answer. One of the there were two kind of obvious things that I missed here on the plans. One is there was no stacking plan for the drive-through. So there was no metric in the staff report about how many cars needed to be stacked, nor was there a comparison of the existing restaurant to this restaurant. And if we get a backup, it'll clog up the main entrance to the entire shopping center there off of Prairie Center Drive. So I'd like some satisfaction that staff's satisfied with the stacking numbers, and so is the user. Second thing is there's 3 utilities that will serve the new building, electric, telephone, and gas, that appear to come from underneath of those right-of-way retaining walls on the west and south through that grove of nice pine trees. And it says just contractor to figure it out on the plan. So I want to make sure that we're not having to take down the retaining wall, or more importantly, take down those large pine trees in that southwest corner of your site where it says that you have to go fetch electrical and gas. I certainly would like to make that LED lighting prescribed for the entire property, contingent upon our approval within that 2-year window, just like the landscaping is and the island improvements. The other thing that was missing on the plan for me was a snow storage plan. That's really the one and only use that I know this lot has now, which is January, February snow storage. It's a really big mountain. I frequent the center often, and so usually when we talk about parking variances, they're pretty easy this time of year, but come February, they're not so easy when you don't haul snow, but you store snow over your remaining parking stalls. So I'd like some dialogue with the owner about that, whether or not they're willing to haul in case parking becomes short on those snow-heavy months. And lastly, just following up on Commissioner Meddy's keen comments about the amount of windows on the facade. You know, I understand the need for branding, and you know, we in Eden Prairie do want to kind of minimize that franchise effect, although it's probably not written down. So I appreciate her comments, and I think some wider windows would help your restaurant as well as any other future use that you were talking about. Certainly your wall construction could take that, and I think it would really enhance the facade. I think on that matter, though, you've gone above and beyond and provided that brick, stone, glass all around the building, and I don't want that to go unnoticed, and we appreciate that very much. It's really good 360-degree architecture. It could use some more glass, especially at the entrance and some of those punched windows, I believe. I did see the cross-sectional view of the tall parapet with the mechanical units in their drawings, and I think they're very well screened. So I don't have a concern about that. So I'll leave it there.
Okay. Would the applicant come forward and speak to those 5 items? Chairman.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, as the development team groups up there, I'll take a stab at answering some of those questions. With regard to the drive-through lane, the traffic study does include an analysis of the drive-through lane. I can't speak to the specific number of stacking spots in their existing location. Should be able to have been there quite frequently. But the traffic study indicates that there would be anywhere from 8 to 12 stacking spots in the proposed location. Staff does not have any concerns with that stacking. In addition, Commissioner Farr raised a question about snow storage, and city staff has been addressing snow storage on these types of redevelopments or infill type sites, if you will, through the development agreement, including conditions that talk about the need to haul snow off-site in order to maintain the required parking, because there's been a waiver that's been granted. So that it is something that is on our radar and routinely gets worked out through the development agreement. So I just wanted to alert you to that.
Thank you.
And that's one thing I'll reiterate as well in talking to ownership, that they were planning on having to remove snow from the site as part of plowing the lot. As far as the gas and electric services, so where we're showing them right now, I do know that it goes where the pine trees are, but the idea is that we would we would install conduit just enough in locations so that we're not impacting those trees. We don't want to remove any of that screening that's there. So part of what is always challenging is nailing down from the public utility companies what their plan is, and they usually don't get involved to the end. But so I guess what I'm saying is what we can do on our end is definitely, as part of that coordination, confirm and verify that they're not going to disturb any of those trees. But the location that we are proposing it, though, there is a break in the retaining wall, and so that's if the service is determined that it has to go south, that's probably the most ideal location, since we don't have to impact that wall. And that's obviously our plan, is to not impact that wall. So. And then as far as the drive-through stacking goes, on the entrance off of Prairie Center, that drive aisle is actually wide enough to basically have 2 lanes there. So if let's say that there's 15 cars backed up, not that that will happen, but if, let's just say that did happen, there is room still for people to bypass that, since that is a one-way entrance to the south, so they can still get to that the main east-west drive aisle between Culver's and Lunds and Byerly's.
Mr. Foss, any comments about windows or additional glass or?
Chuck Jansen, DSC Design Group. The window that you see on the elevations are the ones from the prototype that the franchisor provides and requires. I don't know if there's any reason to add more or reasons not to add more. They're sufficient for the needs of the restaurant. So I guess any additional windows would have to be, to meet your requirements.
Thank you. Any thoughts about that? Or? I guess I kind of like the idea of some more windows, but I don't know, it's kind of, I see their standard. I think that concept of, what did you call franchise architecture? Franchise architecture. I think it's an interesting discussion. I don't think we've ever had that discussion. I think it's probably something we should have, but I was driving on a road trip the other day and I saw a Culver sign. I did see the blue top. I knew I found it, so I think branding's pretty important to them, so. The other last thing Commissioner Farr asked about was the LED contingency. Is that something they could commit to, though, do you think? To upgrade the rest of the parking lot?
Well, it sounds like there's already a semi-agreement in place on the parking islands and landscaping, so I would just put it in that same pot. That's what I heard.
Is that correct, Julie?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, there's a recommendation from staff to support the ability for them to defer the landscape improvements for 2 years, and we would anticipate, assuming positive reaction to that recommendation by the Planning Commission and Council, to include that in the development agreement. And in that development agreement, we would assign a specific date by which those improvements could be made. If the Planning Commission so desires, you can certainly make a recommendation to the City Council to add LED lighting to those improvements in addition to the landscaping parking island improvements.
So let's just maybe just have a healthy dialogue on franchise architecture. It can be a little slippery slope. I think their heart is in the right place. They want to brand their building like all other retailers, and I think we've got an obligation to make sure things are well designed, The term unique is sometimes is thrown around, being special and unique in our town that's different than any other town. Whether that makes us better or not is, I think, open for discussion and debate. I'm an advocate of making buildings unique and distinctive, good quality architecture. Things can last maybe from one user to another, albeit some branding effects would have to get peeled off the building, and someone else is going to come in and do a little, as I call it, a facade-ectomy to the building, which is done all the time. So, you know, the blue stripe, I don't think anybody would live with the blue stripe after Culver's is gone. That's a pretty easy thing to replace. But do we want to dial franchise branding features down to be a little more generic, or to take them in a special design direction so that they customize a building just for this site, just for our city, and put their Culver's logo on it? I think that's a really important discussion to have.
I've got a couple of thoughts on that I'd like to share. We have had this discussion in previous planning commissions. The one that comes to mind particularly is the Spire Credit Union. We asked them to make some fairly significant changes from their branded building, and we came to a compromise there. I think it's a discussion, particularly the way Commissioner Meti brought it up, that needs a lot more thought than what I'm ready to put in right here and now. And my second thought on the franchise architecture discussion as it relates to this specific project is that Culver's exists in Eden Prairie today under the franchise, under a similar franchise architecture. And in fact, I think, Julie, you actually made some of those modifications to more fit the Eden Prairie design guidelines. And as Julie mentioned, we have published design guidelines and they meet them today. Mm-hmm. So to me, to at this point in time in the discussion to go and say, we need to change that, I think is a little bit of pulling the rug out from under them in two senses. One is they meet the existing guidelines, and second, they already have property in the city that we have accepted in the past. That said, I think the discussion is a good one looking to the future, and I think we should take that on as an agenda in the Planning Commission to say, what do we really want to do, and how hardcore do we want to be on the franchise architecture issue, because it's a good one, and I fundamentally agree that we want Eden Prairie to be unique.
I have a separate question aside from this issue, which speaks to landscaping. And I was looking over your landscaping plan. Your site is the southwest corner of an area which has a tremendous amount of asphalt, concrete, and car traffic. And during our summers, we have often very frequent southwest winds, very drying winds. And what I'm getting at is, do you have a provision for an underground irrigation system that can be timed appropriately to maintain the health of the caliper trees that you put in and shrubs?
So as part of the landscape plan, we do have irrigation proposed for all the proposed landscaping that's tied to, or it's coming from the building essentially. So it's going to have like a drip irrigation type system for the proposed landscaping on the Culver site.
Are you going to use recycled water?
We don't have a stormwater basin as part of this project where we would have water recaptured and reused. Because of the reason we didn't have to do this for this project is because there's already some existing stormwater detention as part of the site. So, and plus we were increasing the the pervious area. So there weren't any requirements to have to store water in that way that would be for detention purposes. So if we had that case, that would be a good option. But we don't have that in this site.
I want to interject something, if I could, Mr. Chairman. I want to once again, this is what I'm going to address a little bit to the commission, that what you're talking about is franchise architecture. I agree that may be something for down the road. That's not for right now. What we have is we have someone who is relocating within our city, and our city's in competition with a lot of cities as far as for the business base. And one of the things that I have a hard time is when we start getting redundant, we start losing focus of really what we want to accomplish. And I really want the Culvers to know that they are greatly appreciated in this community. And by talking with an extra window here and an extra window there, I'm not so sure if I was sitting on the other end if I'd be really excited about this. I think we're getting really redundant right now on something that is basically a very, very good project from someone who's relocating by choice in our community. Thank you.
Other comments, questions, discussion items?
Sure, hopefully to
Commissioner Meddy.
help wrap this up, but, and I didn't mean to open up Pandora's box with the franchise architecture, and I agree that's not necessarily something I'm suggesting we implement. It was just a thought in my mind as looking at any of these. But I think going back to my main concern here on the amount of windows, aside from the west elevation that is 0% windows, the rest of the building elevations are between 5 and 10, and that's what I would consider extremely low. In my experience, many cities require 30% glazing, transparent glazing, on their buildings. So I understand a window here, a window there is not a big deal, but I do want to communicate that I feel like this falls well short of what I would expect any normal building to have as far as the amount of windows.
Thank you. Right. Any other comments, questions, or discussions? I entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
I make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
Commissioner Freiberg makes a motion to close. Commissioner Kirk makes a second. All those in favor of closing public hearing, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Entertain a motion.
May I ask a question, just process-wise?
Of course.
Julie, if we were want to introduce some sort of requirement to say add more glazing, how would that go in terms of being able to move forward here? Is that sending them back, or is there an ability to approve with an added comment of increase the glazing by 5% or add 2 windows or anything like that?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission certainly has the ability to recommend with added conditions. So for instance, if you were to recommend that LED lighting be added or that additional windows be provided, you could make that recommendation. The developer then would need to revise those plans prior to being reviewed by the city council. So just playing out timeframes, hypothetically, if the Planning Commission were to take action this evening, this item could, in theory, be scheduled for the July 17th City Council meeting. If the developer put together plans and got them back to us in a timely manner that met those additional recommendations, they could still be scheduled for that meeting. But if those revisions require a bit of time to make to the plan, they may not be able to make that July meeting. They might have to go in August. So typically it's not an issue. Staff can review to make sure that it's compliant with the commission's wishes, but I just wanted to lay out all the scenarios so that you were completely aware.
Thank you. I might try to make a motion with an additional recommendation, unless you had something to say first.
If I can interject, Chairman?
Yes.
On this LED lighting, and my agenda is to push that forward here, but absent one final note on that, and that is, I don't think anybody has said what the current lighting is in the remainder of the parking lot. If it's metal halide versus high-pressure sodium, it's already kind of a whitish-bluish light, and the differential between LED and metal halide isn't all that great, and I'm more apt to let the developer change it on his own schedule once he realizes the energy savings himself without us prodding him along with a cowpoke, as opposed to high-pressure sodium, which is that orange light, where the differential in lighting visual will be significant, in which case I just as soon prod that along. So if someone knows the answer to that, that might help us make a decision on that condition.
Mr. Chair, I defer that question to the development team.
Do you know if the existing parking lot is metal halide or high-pressure sodium?
Okay, well,
We can craft the condition around that. I just
Right.
thought it'd be easier with less words.
If I can make just one more statement, one of the things that we are trying to do with this development, and this is not to, well, it's a timing thing, obviously, with how this development's playing out. One of the goals of this is to get this store open by December, and the goal of that is that allows him the time with the current store operating that he can keep the same employees employed at the new store, as opposed to having to fire everybody and start that process over again. So that's where the timing of how we get through the process becomes challenging for us. So,
Thank you.
Ed, to your comment about the LED, would we actually be able to say anything about that here, or
We would.
Okay, that's outside of
If
this.
allowable. Yeah, I'd be able to craft some words, or you could, but I would say if this, then that, and if that, then this.
What do the commissioners feel about adding some contingency about LED lighting?
I would be supportive of the LED lighting, but I'll let you know I would not be supportive of adding a contingency on more windows.
I'd like to piggyback that what Commissioner Kurtz said. The lighting's not the issue, the windows is. I would not support the windows either.
Let me clarify, I strongly support the project, but I think we should let the project go as it stands today relative to the architecture, in that they meet the guidelines that the city has put forth. And it's consistent with the culvers that has been approved inside Eden Prairie by a prior planning commission.
And that's what my comments were supporting also.
And I'm in agreement with Commissioner Freiberg and Kirk as well. This is a wonderful opportunity to redevelop a very vacant, stale, and sterile location, and I don't want too many encumbrances on the project. And I think the window feature is an encumbrance.
I'd like to say that I agree with everyone in that I in no way would want to create something that would push this timing back. I do think that's important to allow them to open their transition into the new store as quickly as possible. Could I propose what my thoughts are as to the window and then get others' feedback as to whether or not they'd be open to that condition, which I feel that would not delay and would allow this to go on to the city council. My thoughts with the windows is specifically on the north elevation. You have the center main entrance, two sections to the left, awning, windows below. There's 3 sections to the right with no windows. I would propose that you make that symmetrical and add 2 windows into the 2 sections to the right, so that there's 2 to the right, 2 to the left of that north entryway. That would be spandrel glass, since that is back of house. And hopefully that would allow the applicant to simply make that small update in their plans without any delay.
If I remember the floor plan, one of those may be the back of a cooler or a freezer. I'm just trying to think of the floor plan.
That shouldn't affect it. the architect would design a solid wall behind that spandrel glass, if I'm understanding Commissioner Meddy properly.
Okay?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. I just want to make sure that I'm accurately following along with Commissioner Meddy's recommendation. So which elevation were you talking about?
I'm looking at the one you're seeing here,
Okay.
which is not the best because it's from the angle, but the north elevation, which is the right elevation that we're
Yep.
seeing on that,
Yep.
that center where the signage is, that's the center entryway.
Yep.
I would propose that the two, we'll call them sections to the right of that, have spandrel glass that matches the size of the two glass openings to the left of the entryway.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Is there support from that from the other commissioners? Or do you stand?
Could we ask the development team what their opinion of that proposal would be?
What would the proposal be?
For the north elevation, the two to the side of the door to be.
So we're back to
glass.
doing windows again? Of course. I wouldn't support that.
Mr. Jansen.
I'm not sure of the procedure. I understand that the hearing is closed. Do you want a comment from the applicant or not?
Yes, we do.
Okay. When you add the spandrel glass, you're going to have to install a wall inside of that to insulate behind the spandrel glass. So what you do is you push the floor plan into the building further and interrupt the function inside the building, even, with 4 inches or so. But I mean, these restaurants are laid out very precisely with the equipment requirements. So when you start sliding things around, it causes a lot of difficulty and problems inside the building.
Thank you. I guess I wouldn't support the window contingency either. I do support something about the LED though. I feel like that was kind of the consensus.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch what you
I
said.
do support the LED contingency. I wouldn't support the window.
Would not support
Would not support the window. I feel like that was kind of the general consensus. All right. I think we're back to entertaining a motion.
Well, I'll give one a try. Mr. Chairman, move to recommend approval of the Culvers project based on staff recommendations and information contained in the staff report dated June 7th, 2018, and the plan stamped dated June 1st, 2018, with the addition of a recommendation to the overall property owner, United Properties, to include LED lighting for the entire parking lot if, help me out,
If the existing light is high-pressure sodium source.
if the existing light is high-pressure sodium source.
I have a motion by Commissioner Kirk. Do I have a second?
I will second Commissioner Kirk's motion.
Commissioner DeSantis seconds. All those in favor to approve as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
One
And I don't know if I can make the point that it's only because of I'd prefer to add the glass. I don't want to turn down the project, but obviously it's passing, so.
And the minutes can reflect Commissioner Meddy's statement. Great. Thank you. Thank you. Congratulations. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your support, Needham Prairie. Moving on this evening, planners report. Do we have a planners report, Julie? Oh. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, under planners report this evening, just a Aspire 2040 update. So as you know, the Planning Commission has been involved with the City Council over the last roughly 18 months in order to influence and inform the creation of the draft Aspire comp plan update. So that draft has been prepared and has been distributed to the adjacent communities and outside jurisdictions that require the state mandated 6-month review process. So that was distributed at the end of May. So over the course of the summer, excuse me, I'm winded from walking across the room.
Get that?
There's a slight element.
Yes, there is. So over the course of the summer, what staff is proposing to do to bring back to the Planning Commission a couple of chapters at each of your meetings to give the highlights, give the overview, get some feedback from the Planning Commission. The overall goal and intent there is for the Planning Commission to have all of its questions answered through that process, so that when we get to the formal public hearing process in fall, when the public is able to come in, that way we should hopefully be able to focus on any comments and concerns that are raised by the public for the comp plan update, and it'll allow the Planning Commission to become familiar with the draft plan. I know not all of you were able to attend all of the work sessions, so there may be some questions and comments that can come up through the summer, and we will review those and make any modifications to the plan as necessary as you continue to influence and inform that through your comments. So I just wanted to let you know that that's where we're at in the process. Staff anticipates public hearings at the Planning Commission and City Council in the fall so that we can meet the submittal requirement of December as state law requires for the comp plan. So starting at our next meeting, we'll kind of tackle a couple of chapters each evening, and we'll have various staff people here to review that information, experts, if you will, to provide additional information rather than just planning staff.
Julie, somewhere along the line, would a discussion about franchisee architecture make sense along that?
Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission, on that topic, when the city updated its design guidelines, I don't know, 15 months ago, year and a half ago, whatever time frame that was a topic of conversation as the council went through visual surveys in its work sessions in order to draft that. The general topic or general takeaway from that conversation was that the council understood that there is a need for branding. It's a reality in the marketplace. However, there was a desire to have enhanced architectural standards and requirements so that it has that Eden Prairie look and Eden Prairie feel, and understanding that as a community, we want to hold our corporate residents to a higher standard through those architectural and building material requirements, so that, to Commissioner Meddy's comment, it doesn't look like every other business in every other community, but understanding that there is a need for a certain level of branding and identification. So that conversation has been had to a certain degree. That isn't to say we can't expand upon that and talk about it more, but that seems to be more of a zoning ordinance or design guideline conversation rather than a comprehensive plan, blueprint policy type of conversation.
Okay, so maybe at some point
sense?
when the agenda is maybe lacking, we could have a discussion about it again. Just maybe could go through the history a little bit. I don't remember that particular discussion 15 months ago.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Certainly.
I'd just like to add, I think that would be a good idea to have the discussion. And secondly, can you give us some warning on which chapters you're going to present in the agenda so we can reread the sections? I'm sure we've all read them, but we need to reread them.
Absolutely. I can certainly send out a preliminary schedule, if you will, along with the draft, the link to the current draft.
I just want to say I concur that it'd be nice to have the discussion. For me, I think one thing I'm interested in understanding, and maybe a little bit of the history of, the design guidelines don't appear to have a specific window requirement, and is that something that anyone thinks that we'd want to introduce? Because how little of windows could anybody get away with 0 windows essentially if we don't have at least a minimum? So I think that'd be a good topic of discussion.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Is that all for
Mr.
the
Chair,
report?
members, can I comment on that just a little bit? So this zoning ordinance does have transparency requirements in some of the zoning districts. So for instance, the town center and the TOD zoning districts all do have minimum transparency requirements on either the street frontage or specifically defined facades. The other zoning districts do not have that requirement. So Commissioner Meddy's correct that that's not a requirement currently. But because we have a requirement for 75% of Class 1 materials on each facade, and glass, brick, and stone are essentially the three big requirements of that, typically, we don't see buildings with 0. Maybe you see a facade with 0 because it's not on an active street front and you're not looking to promote pedestrian exchange with that building. But I did want to just, as a new commissioner, provide that background for you.
Thank you.
Is it all for the planner's report?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do we have any members report? Continuing business, new business? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second motion.
So moved.
Commissioner Kirk moved. Do I have a second? Commissioner DeSantis, Commissioner Freiberg. All those in favor to adjourn, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everyone.